Well, here we are again. See, I got a new opening. Yay for me. Here we are again, and we will talk about marketing research. And really, there's two primary things that we're going to do in this discussion. And the first one is we're going to define marketing research, and the second thing we're going to do, and what will take up the majority of the discussion, will be to look at the marketing research process. All right, so here's a definition. I have my handy dandy cheat sheet here. So a definition, right? There are different definitions of marketing research, but a definition is the systematic design, collection, analysis, and reporting of data relevant to a situation facing an organization. So again, the systematic design, collection, analysis, and reporting of data relevant to a situation facing an organization. So there's a lot of moving parts there. And just because you've designed your marketing research well doesn't mean that you're going to do a good job of data collection or data analysis or reporting of data. I have a little story that I will tell at the end of this discussion that will illustrate a really well-designed study, one where the data analysis or the data collection was pretty solid. The data analysis was pretty solid as well, and the report writing, not so much. And the reason that this, the reason, not the reason, but a reason that marketing research is really important is, and there's actually two reasons. One is that because the purpose of marketing research is to provide information to help managers make decisions, right? That sounds simple enough, right? So the purpose of marketing research is to help managers make decisions, all right? A second reason for the importance of marketing research is that marketing research can become extremely expensive. And so if you're not conducting marketing research to help managers make decisions, you have to ask yourself, why would I spend not, $1,000, but in some cases $50,000, in some cases $150,000, in some cases $500,000, in other cases well over $1 million. Why would I spend that kind of money if I'm not going to use the results of the research? And so I have an example. It's a number of years old, but back in the early 2000s, the then president of John Carroll University, Father Glenn, decided that the university wasn't doing a very good job of marketing itself. And so he put together a marketing committee, and I was one of the people on the university marketing committee. And the committee ultimately decided that it was just, we didn't have the expertise to really do a good job of figuring out who John Carroll was as an institution, which is an important consideration if you're, trying to market an institution or an organization. So we hired a company, and the university paid them between $150,000 and $200,000 to prepare in my opinion, a really well done report about who the university was and how it could position itself in the marketplace. And there were some high-ranking officials at the university who didn't like the report, so the report was put on a shelf and never heard from again. And so there was, like I said, between $150,000 and $200,000 that just worthless. All right, so let's look at the marketing research process. And following the marketing research process doesn't guarantee success, but what following the marketing research process will do is it will improve chances for being successful. I have a phrase that I like to use is throwing jello at a wall and hope something sticks. And so the marketing research process is not so much throwing jello at a wall and just hoping something sticks, but it basically says, if we do this sequential, if we follow this sequential process, we improve our chances of having successful marketing research, right? Again, it doesn't guarantee success, but it improves the chances of being successful. So the first phase, and it seems simple enough, is to define the problem. You know, what is it that we want to research? And what's key here is that the organization distinguishes between symptoms and problems. So, for example, if an organization sits there and says, "Well, our problem is that you know, we're not making money on something," well, that's not a problem. You say, "Well, yeah, it is a problem." No, that's a symptom, right? And just like in medicine, you know, if you go to a doctor and you say, "Hey, my arm hurts," the arm hurting is the symptom of the problem. What the doctor's looking for is what's causing your arm to hurt. So similarly, if you say, "Hey, we got a line of products, or we got a group of products that aren't making money," that's not the problem. That's a symptom of the problem. So, question is, why aren't the products making money? You say, "Well, hey, I'm an accounting major, or excuse me, I'm an accountancy major, and the reason that the product isn't making money is that the sales don't cover the cost." Okay, so the next question is, why don't the sales cover the cost? And so you see, as you kind of drill down, you get away from, hey, we're not making money, to getting closer to the kind of the reason or the problem. And just like with medicine, right, in marketing research, if you identify the symptoms and then you research the symptoms, when you're all said and done, the problem may still exist. All right, and the key thing is, right, and why it's so important is that, good marketing research or effective marketing research is predicated on defining what the problem is. So if you misdefine the problem, and even if you carry out the next steps really well, what you have isn't going to address the ultimate problem. All right, so define the problem. Second phase, once you define the problem, is to develop a research plan. And this is where, various people sit around and say, okay, so now that we've defined the problem, what kind of data are we going to need to address the problem, and how are we going to collect this data, and what kind of time frame are we looking at in order to do this, right? Because you could take a week, a month, 6 months, 3 years. I'm not thinking that 3 years would be a really good time frame to do stuff, particularly if you have a problem, you'd like to get it solved relatively quickly. So the research plan is going to give you some ideas about the kind of data that you're going to collect, and the time frame in which you're going to do it. So once we've developed our research plan, then we're going to focus more intensely on the data. And there's multiple kinds of data. Excuse me while I itch my nose. There's secondary data, which refers to data that already exists and it was collected for some other purpose. And then there's what's known as primary data. And a lot of times when you hear marketing research, a lot of people think primary data collection, primary data collection, primary data collection, because primary data collection is, quite frankly, primary data collection can be really sexy, right? Ooh. And because primary data collection is really sexy, because what it allows people to do is show off a lot of different skills in terms of methodological skills and things of that nature, oftentimes people rush to do primary data before having a really good understanding of what the problem is and what data might be best used to collect information about the problem. I had a colleague here in the business school a number of years ago who came to me and said, "Paul, you've done a lot of surveys, and I want to do a survey, and so help me design a survey." And my first question to him is, "Well, what do you want to research?" And he says, "Well, that's not really that important." He said, I just want to put a survey together and collect some information." I'm like, "No, no." So in terms of secondary data, secondary data might be sufficient to answer the problem that you've identified in the first step. If it's not, right, it's okay, because then we can go on and we can collect some primary data. So secondary data, there's a couple of types of secondary data. There's internal secondary data, and that's data that is collected by an organization itself, right? An advantage to internal secondary data is it tends to be much less costly than and much less time consuming than exploring external secondary data, which it refers to data that exists outside the firm. Now, there's two different types of external secondary data. There's what is known as public external data, which is data that's free. You don't have to pay for it. So if you think about, for example, the U.S. federal government collects a lot of information. State governments may collect a lot of information or a lot of data. You don't have to pay money to access federal or state databases to collect certain information. Right. There's also what's known as proprietary secondary information, and these are databases that are external to a firm that that an organization would have to pay money to gain access to. And so there are some, for example, there are some marketing research firms that are out there, and you might have heard of something like the Nielsen ratings for television shows. Nielsen ratings, basically what happens is Nielsen will collect data on television shows, and if you're a television network or you're a producer of TV shows, you would have to pay Nielsen to get the information that Nielsen has collected on a particular TV show or series of TV shows. All right, so and again, if we've looked at secondary data and we've decided that secondary data aren't sufficient to address the issues or the problem that we've defined, then we're going to explore, or we're going to need to pursue primary data. And there's three primary ways to collect primary data. The first is or not the first. One is known as observation. Second is known as survey research, and a third is known as experimentation. Experimentation it's not never done in business, but it's not as common in business as it would be in scientific fields, right? So you see a lot of experiments, for example, with respect to pharmaceuticals. If an organization is coming out with a new drug, it will often run tests on people. It'll break it into two groups, right? You have a control group that doesn't get the drug. You have the treatment group that does get the drug, and then there'll be comparisons between the control group and the treatment group. That kind of stuff is much more difficult to do in business environments. So you don't tend to see experimentation used as a primary research or primary data source in marketing research or business research. So that leaves us with observation and survey, and both of those techniques have lots of pluses and lots of minuses. And a lot of times, like I was, the little vignette that I talked to you earlier about, my former colleague here in the business school. I mean, this person just wanted to jump in and do survey research because survey research is the cat's meow. But observation can also be very valuable in particular situations. And one of the things that marketers have come to realize is the value of observation. And so to give you an example, right, Procter & Gamble, which is a major company that's located, its headquarters is down in Cincinnati in Ohio. Procter & Gamble, probably about 10 to 12 years ago, decided that rather than doing its traditional way of collecting data about consumers with respect to Procter & Gamble products, and that tended to be survey-based kinds of research. Now, that might have been an in-person interview kind of stuff where, you or I might sit down with a person from Procter & Gamble, and the person from Procter & Gamble might say to us, okay, Paul, so, how do you use laundry detergent? And say, I do this with laundry detergent and stuff like that. And that's fine. But what Procter and Gamble started to do is, and particularly with respect to laundry products, is it started not interviewing people, but asking if a Procter and Gamble person could be in someone's house while the person, did laundry. And what Procter and Gamble learned from that, right, was very, very different than when it would talk to people, about their laundry habits. And one of the things that came out of the observation was that in discussing people while they were doing their laundry, right? It's one thing to talk to somebody about, doing your laundry when the person's not doing their laundry, right? It's another thing to talk with a person when a person's doing the laundry. And one of the things that came out of Procter and Gamble's, more observation-based research was that people wanted something that was more convenient than either laundry detergent, or either powdered or liquid laundry detergent, and that's where the pods came from. Um, you just take the pod, you throw it in, and voila, I don't have to worry about measuring, and I don't have to worry about spilling and things of that nature. So their observation could be very helpful. Survey research, I don't have enough time to talk about survey research because there's just so many issues with respect to survey research. What kind of survey research are we going to do? We're going to do face-to-face research. If we do face-to-face research, how long should the questionnaire be? Blah, 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 blah. Should we do survey research over the telephone? Should we have pencil and paper? Should we do internet-based? What kinds of questions should we use? Should they be open-ended questions? Should they be closed-ended questions? So there's just a lot of issues, and that's part of the reason why survey research is considered so sexy, is because there's so many different avenues and things like that people can pursue when they're doing survey research. So once we've collected all this data, we need to analyze and interpret the data, right? Because again, the reason that we're doing marketing research is to give managers information to help them make decisions. And so the type of data that's collected is important because it influences the kinds of statistical techniques that can be used to analyze the data. And so you might remember you have nominal data, you got ordinal data, you've got interval data, and you've got ratio level data. And ratio level data is the one that allows you to use the most extensive group of analytic tools, but ratio data isn't often collected. Sometimes you'll see ordinal data, and sometimes you'll see interval data. Interval data being something like a Likert scale, where it'd be 1 to 5, right? How happy are you with your Marketing 301 course, right? Rated from 1 to 5, very happy, happy, nah, unhappy, very unhappy, right? Kind of stuff. And what sometimes happens is that people will take some data type, and then they'll use statistical techniques that really aren't appropriate for the data type. So you got to be really careful and this goes back to when you're talking about your research plan, right? If you're looking to use really high-powered statistical techniques, that's going to impact, right, the kind of information that you're going to need to collect in your marketing research project. So assuming that you've been able to successfully analyze and interpret the data, right, we're not out of the woods yet, because the final phase is to write the report, and then once the report is written, you implement the findings. And one of the key things to consider when you're writing a report is who's going to be reading the report, right? Who will be reading the report, right? A second thing is to make sure that the report addresses the problem that was identified in the first step of the marketing research process. And like I said earlier in this discussion, I had an example. It's almost 40 years old now. That's really scary for me to think about. But it was the first year I was in the doctoral program at the University of Maryland, and a Maryland-based trucking company approached the transportation group in the business school at the University of Maryland and said, hey, the world has changed for us. The trucking industry had been deregulated in the United States, and this company wanted to learn where to put its truck terminals, right? It never really had a good process for figuring out where to put its truck terminals. So we at the University of Maryland, in the transportation group in the School of Business at the University of Maryland, we put together a marketing research plan. We analyzed data, and we did a really, we used sophisticated data techniques because we were able to use sophisticated data techniques. And then when it came to write up the report, the professor that was in charge of it, he decided to write a report that looked like an academic article instead of a report that was best suited for senior level executives at a trucking company, some of whom didn't have a college education. And it just turned out to be an absolute cluster mess. I got to use the clean phrase there, because it just didn't work. And to show you how crazy this was is that after we did our thing and they thanked us politely, that trucking company went out and hired another firm to do the exact same thing, with the ultimate thing saying, write us a report in language that we can understand, and tell us, right, where to put our truck terminals, right? Because the report that we had put together didn't tell them where to put their truck terminals. So, I'm getting really long-winded this semester. I've hit the 20-minute mark, so we will see you down the road. Bye.